Hey guys, my name is Dr. Aaron Brinen. I'm an assistant professor at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. And what we're going to focus in on today is this idea of how are we going to use the protocol? Because we talk about this a lot, this protocol for recovery-oriented CBT for psychosis, and that there's these three pieces to the protocol. Oftentimes, it can sort of get muddied and not really think about what to do as we get into the weeds of serving the individuals day to day. So the goal for today is to get a better understanding of the protocol, how to use it, and exactly what does it look for? Like, why are we going to use it? And then what does it look for in what does it look like in actual practice? So for people who have gone through the main training, this should look very familiar. The CTR protocol of activation, aspirations, and then action. Activation is this idea of jumping in and activating the individual into an adaptive mode. It can be everything from small talk. It can be doing an activity with somebody like throwing a frisbee or watching a video or going for a walk. It can be giving somebody a little bit of a simple gift, any of those pieces. Once we have somebody activated, we then move on to the aspirations. Those are the things that we want to be doing, the things that we want to get, those big picture things that motivate us. It might be getting back to school to become a doctor. It might be getting a house. It might be having a family. So there's all of these pieces that we have around aspirations. And then finally, the aspirations drive the action, right? And what we're looking at is the basic intervention of activity scheduling. It's monitoring, it's evaluating, monitoring, and increasing our daily activity, and then learning some lessons from those experiences. So that's really the basic protocol. Today, we're going to talk about how does it actually roll out like that. So here's the overview of it, right? We're going to use that activation. And I oftentimes in the main workshops, we'll talk about that idea of if you've ever asked somebody a bunch of questions, they give you one-word answers, and you give up and you go, oh, heck, do you think that Barbie movie's any good? And then all of a sudden, the individual sort of like just explodes into a diatribe of, what's going to make the movies come back to life? What's going to make them good again? And really that they're more excited about seeing Oppenheimer or whatever, right? It's, you talk about sports and they give you a lecture on how, their favorite team is going to make it to, the Super Bowl this year, whatever those things are. But it's that way in which all of a sudden this person was giving you one-word answers, they come to life for you. Same thing, somebody who's chronically hearing voices, all of a sudden, we activate them and they come out and they're able to interact with you much, much more, right? You talk to them about their favorite car and you see their eyes light up and they lock in with you. And those people who have been at the rodeo for a minute, I think we naturally have a way of doing it. We've seen that happen over the years. In CTR, what we're really looking at is systematizing what works. So when we don't connect with the individual, it's easier to pull them in, right? From there, the aspirations are going to really give us that driving piece for us. Once we have those aspirations, we really want to ripen them up. As we ripen them up, any obstacle to pursuing those aspirations, we're going to target with our interventions. And we have these formulations. The team, right? Every member of the team is going to work as one large arm, helping an individual move toward those aspirations that they want in their life. But it gets a little bit more complicated as we go in. So what we want to be thinking about are these two modes will sort of drive us toward it. There's an adaptive mode. It's that moment where you go, oh, this is that young person, right? This is that individual that I knew that I was going to serve. It's when you connect with that individual. Oftentimes, it's those natural ways of interacting with a person. We draw out the humanity from underneath them. The other mode is this patient mode. And really, I can't stress enough that we frequently can elicit, as providers, we can elicit the the patient mode. It's that time where we see a high presence of symptoms, a high presence of deactivation. It might be a grandiose beliefs that they have, or sort of suspiciousness and persecutory beliefs. Oftentimes, the patient mode is elicited when we're coming at them in a very medical approach, right? When it just looks like we're coming at them with therapy. That's where activation becomes really, really valuable. It doesn't feel like we're approaching them as somebody who's broken or might have an illness. I'm not saying that that's our intention. I'm saying that many of the individuals that we serve, or I'll say many of the individuals that I serve, I am not their first stop along this journey. And so I inherit with me all of the ways that they've interacted with providers before. And so not everybody who our individuals come in contact with are like the people who are here today, right? Or the people who might be watching this in the future. And so understanding that if an individual sees themselves as broken or ill, or that others are against them, right? Their self-confidence is lowered, right? All of those things are going to kindle some of the very symptoms that are going to become obstacles to interacting with the individual, identifying their aspirations, helping them move forward. So ultimately, when we get into here, activation becomes really crucial to circumnavigate those very symptoms and activate that adaptive mode. That time when you just feel like, wow, I'm just sort of really vibing with this kiddo. So let's start talking about how do we use the overall protocol, right? And how does it really lay out? Because not every young person, and I'm assuming many of the people, you guys who are watching this with me today, not every kid, you just activate them, they give you your aspirations, and then all of a sudden they get active and they're cured, right? And like everything's great. So we need to think about how can we use this protocol to really move forward through the muddiness, the ways that what does it look like in reality, right? So we've got this arrow, and one of the things that this arrow, the fact that it's along this continuum, the arrow provides us this idea of if ever we're moving forward and it isn't working, just move one step back in the arrow, right? That's why the arrow, we always felt like, oh, it's a helpful kind of visual to have in our mind. So as I said, for some of the folks, we're going to start with activation. We're going to elicit their aspirations, right? So we get them activated. We're talking about the movies. We're talking about the Eagles a little bit, right? And all of a sudden we go, this is really great. What else do you want to be doing? What else do you want to get? And the young person goes, oh, and they tell you, and they go, great, can I help with that? And then we start planning that out, right? Getting a little bit more active in their life, planning the steps toward those aspirations that they want. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. So that's for some of the people. A very small portion of those people, right? I think any of you guys watching this now are going, that seems really easy. That doesn't seem like the folks that I get to see. So let's sort of back it up a little bit. Really, what happens is we start with activation, and we might do that for a whole session, right? We may sit and activate the person for a whole session. We may go for a walk, right? We may watch a couple YouTube clips. We may pull out a guitar and play guitar, play Frisbee, any of those things that we might do, right? And that might actually take the whole session of just having that young person being activated. Once we sort of had that activation going, we can sort of plan that into some action, into some activity, right? So it's that first session, or the first couple sessions or first couple meetings, whether it's with a team or whether you're doing this individually, I do activation and then I go, oh, do you ever watch YouTube clips with anybody else? And they go, no. I was like, well, if you share that with you said your mom really is into cooking too. Yeah. Why don't you share it with her, right? So ultimately it goes activation into action. You go for a walk and they go, oh man, I have more energy. I was like, that's super weird. You ever do that other times? And they're like, no, I don't. I said, you want to give it a shot this week and see what happens? They're like, I guess so. I'm like, I guess so, right? So activation into action, right? We're not setting up a really formal activity schedule. We're not giving the rationale for like activity scheduling and monitoring. Super simple, right? We might kind of write it out, put it onto a card, send it home with the young person. If they've got a smartphone, you may program it in and then say, tell me how it goes. Activation into action, right? Then the action is going to lead to more activation. And so this might be a loop that we're in for a little while. The reason why we want to do this cycle, activation into action, action into activation, activation back into action, action into activation, is that it works almost like activity as an antipsychotic, right? Think about activity as almost like the way we think about medicine. Everybody says, oh, well, it takes like 8 days to 2 weeks for the medicine to get into their system and start working. We can do the same thing with activity, because any of the models that we think about, right? Let's think about how worry drives persecutory delusions. If I start doing more in my everyday, every time I'm doing a little bit more, I have a little bit less time for the worry. As the worry goes down, the persecutory delusion goes down a little bit. I'm not doing the full worry intervention, but I'm definitely giving them a break from it. If I'm up and I'm talking to my mom about, how to make the perfect grilled cheese sandwich, I'm not sitting in my room listening to the voices telling me what a terrible person I am and how much people are going to try and harm me. So if I'm not listening to those voices I'm getting a little bit of a break from it. And so ultimately that activity is providing this sort of almost antipsychotic quality to it. It's giving me a distance from the symptoms that I'm experiencing. Once I have that cycle going and you start seeing that young person coming in and the individual has a little bit of a break from the experience, well, then we might go, wow, this is great. What else do you want to be doing? What else do you want to get? Right? Then we're going to get the aspiration, right? Once you get the aspiration, we're actually going to come all the way back and use that aspiration as an opportunity for activation, right? Because we're going to use the ripening. We're going to go, oh, what's good about it? What would you want to be doing? Really sort of ripening it. Tell me more about it. What would you go to school for? You're going to get them really dreaming about that fun part of it, not planning out the aspiration. But, well, would you paint your apartment, or are you kind of like a white walls kind of guy? Those types of that dreaming about that aspiration, which will provide more activation, right? With more activation, then it's going to motivate the action. So there's this very cyclical approach to using the protocol. So I hope that sort of makes a little bit more sense, because ultimately one of the areas where the protocol starts to break down is people use activation. They say, well, I tried to get the aspiration and they said, I don't know. And I tried to get them being more active, and that didn't, I tried doing an activity schedule, that didn't work. And so in reality, we're really looking about the cyclical piece of it. Activation is going to be used as this basic behavioral experiment for the individual, right? We're going to be able to test out, we went for a walk and I had more energy, not less energy, right? We talked about this for the whole time, and the voices bothered me less, not more, right? They didn't bother me the whole time we were talking. I wasn't worrying the whole time we were together and wasn't thinking about all those people who were trying to harm me. So that I was able to get my words out much clearer, right? The whole time we were talking about, the Eagles, I was able to sort of speak really clearly. That was really weird how I was able to do that. And so it's always this sort of basics testing out, this basic initial testing out for the individual. The other thing that activation provides us is this opportunity for increasing activity through the week. And so better to do a little bit of activity and do it successfully than try to add a lot of activity in and have the person not try it at all. Aspirations are going to give us that opportunity to increase activation through that ripening process. Also, once we have a really exciting aspiration, it provides this wonderful activation every time the person comes in. So let's say that person's really excited about their apartment. You can talk about their apartment every single time that they come into the office. You could look at recipes that they want to cook when they have people over to their apartment every single time. So it becomes this really nice touch point for creating activation when the person comes in, really getting them sort of into that adaptive mode. Finally, action is going to allow us to organize all of the interventions and develop a set of learning from it. So it really provides this outline for how do we tackle different obstacles as they come up. Because while I would love to say all you have to do is get somebody activated, get their aspirations and get them doing things, and all of the symptoms that they've come with you to you with, every problem that they've come with you will magically evaporate. It's just not true. It just doesn't work that way, right? We still need these good, focused, sharp interventions to move certain of the obstacles that people have out of the way. And so as the obstacle interferes with taking action toward where the individual wants to be, we can start with a generic formulation, because some of the actual problems that individuals might present are kind of hard to do a chain analysis around. It's hard to ask somebody about, what's going through your mind when you don't want to talk, right? It sort of is, tell me what's going through your mind as you don't want to talk. It kind of just sounds weird. And somebody having trouble getting words out of their mouth, right, because of, say, thought disorder, it's hard to go, what thoughts are you having? And, it makes it more complicated. So we have some of the generic formulations, and over time, we'll continue to return back to them. Also, if you ever attend sort of the main training, we go through formulations for each of the problems. As we have those formulations, we can tailor it with new information that we get from the individual. And then we address the obstacle in the context of moving toward the things that they want. The overall protocol provides an organizational component that the individual can see, I need to do this, then this, then this. So it doesn't feel like they have this bucket full of things that they can do to make themselves better, but no organization to it. The goal of it is to neutralize this obstacle in a more permanent fashion. We want to give them essentially fire retardant versus fire extinguishers. Right? Fire extinguishers, I just pull out this skill and use it every single time the problem comes up. But that kind of means that I keep lighting my house on fire and then putting out the fire. Instead, we want sort of a fire retardant. We're going to come up with ways of living your life that are incompatible with these problems. So this is the protocol, but we can think about things like motivation, right? Problems with motivation. That's going to make it really tough to sort of get activated altogether. So we can think about what are the formulations around avolition, asociality, things like that. Aspirations, right? If I'm feeling really, anxious about other people, if I'm feeling really suspicious, moving from aspirations and talking about my aspirations and action, we can target that with things like the Feeling Safe program and those interventions. Action, getting out and doing things. If I'm hearing voices, if I have PTSD, so the memory's barraging me, I can drop into each of those spots a specific intervention. I can drop prolonged exposure into, as we're thinking about becoming active, right? So you want to get back to school, but this memory keeps popping in your mind. That's really scary, right? You want to apply for a job, but you're really scared that people are going to focus in on you and are going to harm you. What if we could spend some time and work on each of those pieces? And so within the protocol, every time there's an evidence-based treatment, we can drop that in much more easily. And it also creates the rationale for it. It creates the motivation. You want to get back to school. That sounds really important. It sounds like that memory of that bad thing that happened to you is making it hard to even imagine doing that. What if we could work on that memory so it doesn't get in the way of getting back to school? What if you could feel safe enough to do the things that you want to do in your life? Would that be worth it? Now all of a sudden, this young person's going, yeah, let's do it. Great. Feeling safe, prolonged exposure, maybe a DBT skills group for somebody who has sort of their emotions go up and down, a get up and go routine and activity scheduling for a person with low motivation, right? It makes sense to do the interventions in the context of moving toward the things that the individual wants in their life. So that's sort of a brief overview of how we can hypercharge the use of the protocol, right? Creating that cycle of getting that person's activation going so that way they can ultimately add a little bit more activity during the week, right? Once you get that cycle going and that activity gets into their system, it's much easier to then elicit those aspirations. Every time a person comes in, they sort of become sensitized to the idea of, oh, when I come and meet with Aaron, I always feel a little bit more energy, right? So it's almost like a classical conditioning paradigm, right? They see me, right? Or they see their provider and they go, oh, we're going to talk about, music. So they kind of come in a little bit peppier. Once it gets into their system, it's easier to elicit that aspiration. What do you want to be doing? What do you want to get? Can I help with that? Tell me more about it, right? So we're going to ripen it up. And then I go, let me help with that. And then it provides activity. As the person becomes more active, we're going to start noticing more of those obstacles that are getting in the way. Voices, thoughts, memories of bad things that might have happened, suspiciousness, grandiose beliefs, any of those things. And then we target that with a really specific intervention. But we have a rationale for that intervention, which is to get them back to school, to get them taking care of their kid, and it's the things that they want to do.